looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains, haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up, fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHH LP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
Good morning, everybody. And that was Harry, our station manager at WNHH. And Harry, let me wish you happy holiday season and everybody else a happy holiday season, because these are certainly some stressful seasons, but I think we're looking forward to hopeful seasons as well. It doesn't have to be just on a particular day of the year, but every day can be a hopeful day and a hopeful season. And in fact, today's show, in terms of COVID-19 vaccines, treatments, and research, is, I think, perhaps the most fitting show to have at this point in time, at this point in our history, because we do want to keep hope alive. We do want to celebrate health and peace on earth toward men. And for that to happen, we have people on this show that are really going to kind of drill down and share with us how that's possible and how we all can kind of band together for us to really take ownership of our health. So again, today's topic is COVID-19, vaccines, treatments, and research. And really super honored to have the co-chair of President-elect Biden's COVID-19 advisory board with us, Dr. Marcella Nunez-Smith, and just as importantly, leading COVID researcher, Dr. Charles Dela Cruz, along with my good friends, Reverend Elvin Clayton and Reverend Leroy Perry, who have been with us before. It's really important for us to kind of just understand this moment in time, but how we can all take advantage, and I literally use this term, take advantage of the resources, the information, and the actions that we all can take. Dr. Smith, if I can start off with you, because people are hearing so much different information, et cetera, and just wondered if this is certainly a task that's on your shoulders, and we all kind of want to help lift you up. But as a co-chair of President-elect Biden's COVID-19 advisory board, can you tell us how, in some ways, President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris, and actually the advisory board as a group, can help us and help you address vaccine hesitancy?
Yeah, well, good morning, Tom, and thank you so much for having us on the show and for covering this important topic. It is a real great question now to talk about vaccine hesitancy or vaccine confidence. Certainly, as you mentioned, I'm serving as co-chair and the COVID-19 Transition Advisory Board for the incoming Biden-Harris administration. Serve along with two terrific colleagues, Dr. David Kessler, as well as Dr. Vivek Murthy, who will be our Surgeon General, most hopefully. But the group really does bring together just many scientific experts to think about a whole host of questions, including the right question about vaccine confidence. I think it's really important just to say that the president-elect and the vice president-elect have a real commitment to leading with science and data and evidence and centering on equity. And so that is really kind of the beginning and end of every conversation. And we unfortunately see a politicization, right, of not just the virus, but also the vaccine that we have to counter. I think getting out there, making sure people have the information that they need, meeting people where they are in terms of the vaccine on questions like safety, around side effects and side effect risk or adverse events, efficacy, and really understanding how well it works to keep people healthy once they've gotten one of the vaccine candidates, and questions about cost. Really, will there be surprise bills of any kind? So, I think it's important for us to recognize who people trust to hear information from. For so many of us in the country, it is our healthcare professionals and providers. So one of our goals is making sure that healthcare professionals and workers, have that information so they can make good decisions for themselves and really recommendations for their patients.
But and I might ask you the same question a few different ways, because I've been reading articles, as I think everybody is, and we're somewhat bombarded in the news with information about COVID, and sometimes our mind is turning on and turning off. So I just wanted to kind of ask again about how's the group seeking help to address this vaccine hesitancy?
Yeah, absolutely. So, always a reminder, President-elect Biden very strongly, realizes there's one administration, at a time. And so he's not the president right now, but he has really charged us all to be ready on day one. And so this is a day one conversation. We've been spending a lot of time as an advisory board and as the policy teams we work with on the transition, talking to really important stakeholders, local, national representatives, having conversations like we're having today. We're making sure that we're hearing from all the groups that have been hardest hit in this pandemic and having conversations really specific to what gives rise to vaccine hesitancy, the fact that there is a lot of misinformation that's out there, and really working on developing sort of campaigns. We have lacked a coordinated federal message around the vaccine, as unfortunately with some of the other aspects of COVID-19. So that's a gap that the new administration is anxious to fill. But I just want to say I'm very grateful to all of the many organizations who are getting out ahead of this. Mm-hmm. We will do this work through partnership. And so certainly that is something that has been inspiring. I know for me to witness is just how many people are making sure that there is accurate, timely information that is getting out to their constituents, their neighbors, their friends and family members and communities, even in the absence of a coordinated federal message at this time.
And Dr. Dela Cruz, just before I come to you, can I just interrogate our co-chair here for a few more minutes, because this is just so important. We'll come back to you. President Biden has talked about the wearing the mask for the 100 days from starting on January 20th. Tell us about that. Is that kind of a request? Is it a mandate? Is it an imperative? I know you're walking kind of a delicate political line, but I was just curious, so your thoughts about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, the president-elect understands that, there is COVID fatigue. That's a real thing, that we've kind of been at this a long time, and it can be hard for folks. And so he's asking that everyone really commit, right, for those 100 days to wearing the mask. As he has said many times, the ask is really for us to do the patriotic thing and protect one another through wearing the mask. I'm often asked about the mask mandate. So it is, very true that sort of federal property, national parks, travel, some of those areas, we will see a requirement for wearing masks. But, really when it comes down to it, it's working with mayors, governors, other local leaders to continue to really strongly encourage everyone for them. We know the masks work, right? We know that wearing the mask and wearing them, importantly, wearing them properly, right? Covering our nose and our mouth, being attentive to what kind of mask we're using, to wearing that when outside or even inside if you might be exposing someone at higher risk in your house. So we know that they work. And I think one of the important messages for everyone to hear, we do see light, right? At the end of the tunnel, the vaccine candidates bring us kind of hope and optimism. But we still need, this is the time to recommit and double down to the things that we know work well. And that is wearing our mask, avoiding small crowds and gatherings, especially as we approach the holidays, continue to wash our hands, all of those basic public health practices. We're really asking everyone to let's all do our part, and then we'll get to the other side.
Well, definitely congratulations. And Dr. Nunes, you've also been, correct me if I'm wrong, on January 20th, the task force doesn't go away. You have some responsibilities after January 20th.
Yeah, so it's a great privilege to be co-chairing the advisory board, and as the advisory board, we definitely serve at the pleasure of the president-elect, and we are waiting to know whether or not we sunset as an advisory board at time of inauguration. But most certainly, what will be stood up is an equity task force specific to COVID-19 that will be part of the White House COVID cabinet. It's my privilege to serve as the inaugural chair of that group. We know, again, and this group especially, and your listeners, that COVID-19 has not been an equal opportunity offender. And all of the many consequences around economic hits. We talk about housing, food insecurity, right? This is harder impact on particular communities, communities of color, lower income communities, indigenous communities, tribal communities, and others. And so it will take a concerted effort and investment. And I think that is what the president-elect is signaling, and the vice president-elect in standing up this task force, that this will be a top priority in the administration to make sure that there is equitable recovery for everyone in the country, not just for some.
Tremendous, tremendous. Dr. Dela Cruz, you're on the front line here. And again, people are fighting this battle of prevention, but people are still falling sick as we speak right now. You've been on the clinical and research side of this pandemic before it was even called, before you knew that COVID-19 existed in terms of your medical background. What does treatment look like now compared to what doctors and nurses were doing early on when the virus was such an unknown?
Yeah, thank you very much, Tom, and for the audience, and happy holidays. I think this is an important way to send the message out and also provide some hope for the future. We actually have learned a lot since the beginning of the pandemic. A lot of the physicians and scientists, including those at Yale, have really studied and worked hard to find what is the best way to manage our patients, both from the outpatient side, also when they get hospitalized. And so what we've learned is that there are certain medications when you get hospitalized that work well, and some that don't. And this is through clinical trials and studies that many people around the world have participated. And so this second time around in New Haven, we have a better idea some of the medications to treat our patients when they get hospitalized. And unfortunately, for some people, those are not enough. And so there are ongoing trials to see additional medications and therapeutics to treat those patients. From an outpatient side, there were quite limited options for patients who are not so sick, fortunately, but still infected with symptoms. And we know for some of these patients, the symptoms could be prolonged for a subset of them. And so there are some advances with antibody therapies for some of these patients, and Yale has provided those efforts and options for patients who are from an outpatient setting. And there are also clinical trials that are ongoing at Yale, specifically while we wait for most people to get vaccines so that they have options to be treated if they are infected. And so we definitely learn a lot in terms of how this disease takes place. We also learn in terms of what are the best ways to avoid getting infected, as you heard Dr. Nunez-Smith, in terms of mask, social distancing, staying away from big crowds. Those have been studied many times over to show that it is important to do these social distancing and hygiene practices while we wait for this COVID pandemic to end. In addition, there's a lot of really smart people to try to figure out how this virus affects different parts of the body, your lungs, your heart, your brain, for example, and so we know that this virus could cause a big problem for many folks, and so I think I'm hopeful. We're certainly in a better shape than maybe in the spring. However, I think there's more to be learned. I think it's with partnership with our collaborators and colleagues, and also the audience that you have in terms of learning what their issues are, and so addressing those issues as well from a public health standpoint.
Dr. Dela Cruz, that's great. But Cher, you indicated a little bit about clinical research, but I think people have kind of lost sight of the fact that that research is still never stopped and is still going on. And you say a little bit more about that, because it's fair to say that we may have an infectious disease again, in the future.
Exactly. I think as we try to deal with this current pandemic, and it's certainly not over yet, we are very hopeful about the vaccines that are coming out. The vaccines that are now available and approved. And one of those vaccines have been studied at Yale, and many of your participants and audience were participants of those studies. And currently, as what we have heard, the frontline workers as well as people in the long-term care facilities are getting it as we speak. And then from news more recently, they are moving towards people who are above 75 years old, and also the frontline workers will be next in line. And so we hope that as the vaccine gets distributed, more and more people will be taking it, so while that happens, there's more research that needs to be done. For example, people are continuously getting infected in high-risk areas. In Connecticut itself, our numbers are quite high compared to, say, the summer. And more people are getting infected, even not knowing who they got it from. And so some of them develop symptoms, and at this point, we don't have good options for them, which is why it's important to think about participating in these clinical trials for options that could be easily given to those people, such as a pill that they can take home that might decrease the virus and also progression of disease.
Excellent. And Dr. Nunez and Dr. De La Cruz, I just want to kind of get Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton to comment, because they also have been actually put not their life on the line, but at least their reputation on the line by participating in the trials, and they're still so healthy. But Reverend Perry, you've been so important to the community in terms of sharing information and just your church and your pastoral commitment and your community commitment. But can you tell us how you've been mobilizing locally?
I think that we've been on the battlefield not only with this particular project, but with other research projects, and so we have a kind of format and of reaching out to the community. Part of that format is collaboration with leaders and other faith group communities within the community, as well as our own. And we are working on a newsletter. We're working, of course, with you and the Ficklin show, which we appreciate. But I also was able to see that there are other community groups that are taking this seriously. For example, I was on the call with the NAACP that was reaching out to our communities. And I thought that was a phenomenal show, because it dispelled a lot of the myths that has to do with this COVID vaccine. And at the same time, it points to how important community is. Mm-hmm. It's not just one individual, but it's a community. And if our community is left out of this equation, when everybody else has taken this vaccine, we may be left out permanently. So, I mean, we've got to be watchful, and we've got to be vigilant, and we've got to continue to get the word out and to educate our community about how important this vaccine is. I was looking at the person in the news today who was on the plane who did not declare that he had COVID, and all of the people around them. And I'm thinking that could happen to any community. Mm-hmm. If we just think of individuals and we don't care about our community, we put our whole community and our whole history at risk. So it's important that we get this word out, and it's important that we get the information out. And just let me just say lastly this, that it is systemic. Because, you know, we keep thinking that it's all about Tuskegee, but it's more than just about Tuskegee. It's also about the fact that you can't trust physicians who don't look like you, who don't understand you, who are not a part of your community. And we've got to do something really to change that whole picture. So it's a lot going on, and I'm thinking we're working toward bridging those gaps of equity, and so that we can protect not only our community, but the community at large.
And great. And Reverend Clayton, just before I come to you, Reverend Perry, I just wanted to ask you again about that you participated in the vaccine study. I'm not sure whether you don't know whether you got the placebo or the actual vaccine, but you participated.
Hallelujah. No. I'm hoping that I got the vaccine. All right. And I'm hoping that if I didn't, that they will unblind the study and give it to me. I know that Moderna said that they had made enough of the vaccine to do that with people who had participated in their studies. And I know Tisha Johnson is working on our behalf to see that might happen in our near future. Amen to that.
But why was that important for you to kind of participate in the trial?
I run a fatherhood program. I work at a CAP agency. I pastor a church, and I've talked to members of our community and all different levels. And it just seemed to me that you've got to practice what you preach. And I think that if they trust me then maybe they will see that I would not lead them or do something that I myself would not be willing to do. And I think that that's what leaders do. They lead.
And you've been I've been involved also here in New Haven with the Fight the Flu New Haven campaign, and in the Brantford community, you've been working with the Brantford community on flu and flu shot, et cetera. Tell us about that, because people are forgetting that whether it's the flu shot or the upcoming vaccine or just washing your hands or just taking ownership of your health, it's all kind of related, in my opinion, and interconnected. But tell us about your activity in the Brantford community pertaining to.
Well, see, in the Brantford community, the St. Stephen's Amy Zion Church started the Martin Luther King breakfast. And so every year we have this community breakfast with about between 500 and maybe 1,500 people who attend. So members of that community reached out to me and said, what else can we do during this Black Lives Matter, during this pandemic? What can we do for the marginalized people within our community? So I set up a meeting with Tisha and even Marcella and some other people that we could go in and we could talk to them to see how we could start a program that had to do with taking charge of your health and to reach out to marginalized communities. So it's been phenomenal. We started with the flu vaccine and reached out with a campaign to show how important that was, with flyers, newspaper articles, with church participation and community leaders. And that is one of the first steps I think we need to do. We need to put our health on the front lines and put our attention there and reach out not only to our seniors, to those who are marginalized. By that I mean those who are living in trailer camps, those who would be considered indigent or poor, those who don't have access to internet. How do we reach those people? And so that's what the project has been trying to do. And if we do this, like at Yale, what we're doing with YCCI, we may be able to make models of this other communities. And so it's very hopeful, and I feel very good about it. I feel like I'm Booker T. Washington today, or John Hope Franklin or somebody. I'm working with the community to make a better world for all of us.
Excellent, excellent. Reverend Clayton, I understand you also participated in the COVID study. So share with us a little bit about your thoughts and why that was important to you.
Good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
It was important to me to be a part of the study because, number one, I'm a father, I'm a pastor, I'm a community leader, and we're talking to members of the community about the vaccine. So I thought it would be a good idea to be a part of the study, to lead the way and show that I'm willing to put my actions or put my actions where my mouth is.
I mean, that's certainly very important. The reason I kind of pose the question and the backdrop to that is you and Reverend Perry and the other cultural ambassadors have been really working for a decade. I mean, 10 years now on messaging about the importance of clinical trials and taking ownership of your health, particularly around now COVID-19 research and the vaccine study. Talk to me about some of the efforts and accomplishments that you've been able to achieve during this time.
Well, there have been multiple efforts, but in terms of this vaccine study, if my memory is correct, the minority participation was quite low. And through Yale and the cultural ambassadors, the minority participation was somewhere around 40%. And I think that is a great thing because our community got hit very, very hard with COVID. And still, I have some funeral directors that are friends. they're very busy, and a lot of the people have died of COVID. But if I may take liberty, I need to ask the question, since we have Dr. Smith with us today. She mentioned earlier about the 100 days and commitment to wearing a mask. And Tisha and I were having a conversation, and I had a mask on that was loose. And then she was speaking to me about people in supermarkets and malls, et cetera, with any type of mask on. And I hadn't paid much attention to what type of mask they were wearing, but I noticed people put anything over their face. And Dr. Smith, if you could just talk to that a little bit about maybe the proper mask, because maybe some might be far better than others. If you could just speak a little bit about that, it might be helpful to our listening audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I had a little smile there, Reverend Clayton, because, I did sneak in. You have to wear the mask consistently, but you have to wear it the correct way. And the kind of mask does matter. And I think we all sort of see folks in the grocery stores and other places that, maybe don't have it on correctly. I always give folks a little friendly reminder. And, so far, and I think this is something about the optimism and hope, because, no one has said anything other than thank you, right? When reminded about it. So absolutely, the kind of mask does matter when we talk about face covering. And so just very briefly, you want to be sure that your face covering is at least 2-ply or 2 layers, right? And so people will be wearing surgical masks or cloth mask, and those are acceptable. But it's important, like the kind of cloth even, right? So we're looking for a tightly woven cotton and not the fleece. So a lot of people will use the fleece and will, the gaiters and pull those up. And those are actually, in some studies, shown to be more harmful than not wearing a mask at all. And, we also advise a filter pocket in those cloth masks. And you could use, for instance, we use coffee filters as that filter. Have to remove it every time, remove it before washing. You could use, unscented dryer sheets. So, the CDC, I will refer everyone in the listening audience, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, they do have guidance on the best and most appropriate kinds of masks to wear. Really critical for people to know that they need to be laundered, very hot water too when you come in. And sometimes you can double up on these and it's not a problem to do so. There's some studies that suggest if you put a surgical mask on, you could put a cloth one on top, and that might give you some added benefit. And just to remind people about your eyes as well. So we should also just keep in mind, particularly when I'm giving advice to people who are traveling or might be in sort of confined space to protect your eyes. But thank you, Reverend Clayton, for giving us a moment to talk about that. The mask needs to be a snug, right, on your face, so the fit matters as well as the kind. And just ask your friend, as you would ask somebody about kind of did you miss any buttons on your shirt before you leave. You can have somebody check and make sure your mask is fit and appropriate. So absolutely. But it's these simple things that will make a difference for us all, really.
Great. In terms of, I still talk to people that they're resisting about participating in clinical trials and even resisting about getting the vaccine once it becomes available to them. Reverend Clayton, it occurred to me that I believe that your wife also participated in the trial. Is that correct?
That is correct.
How were you able to, just curious, were you able to persuade her? And I mention this because even within families, you can love one another, but you also have different perspectives about things. So this is a one-to-one, your immediate village issue. And so, if you don't mind sharing with our 10 million people how lovely your wife is, and also how she finally agreed with you.
It was very simple. I told her if she didn't get in the study, I was going to divorce her. No, I'm just kidding.
This is live radio. This is live radio, by the way.
I simply asked, and And she readily said, okay. But she got on the phone when I was not in the room. She called her sister, who was a physician assistant, and she called our niece, who was a medical doctor, and she asked them did they think it was okay for us to do this. And they clearly were supportive of her doing so.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Reverend Perry, earlier on, I thought you had kind of subliminally was raising your question, your hand.
That was one of the questions I was going to raise with Reverend Clayton about his wife, because they have a honeydew relationship. And I was thinking about how important that is, that families have this discussion. I had the same discussion with my daughter, and the mere fact that I had information about the COVID vaccine and the Pfizer study, I was able to let her know that this was not a study that took place hurriedly, but that they have been studying this SARS vaccine for years. And so, it was not, and the other thing I wanted to let her know is that I thought it was safe enough because it had already gone through a number of stages of safety, and I wanted her to know how important for young people to be involved in this process. And so I appealed to her better nature and said, just think what you're doing for people in your age group.
Yes.
And they see that you're doing this. And I think that's the way we have to work together with communities, that families have to come together and have this conversation. They have to have the facts, they have to have the information. And I think that we will do better if we start at that level.
We have about another 20 minutes or so we have some good time to still brainstorm and share with one another. I just wanted to mention and ask Dr. Dela Cruz and Dr. Nunez-Smith, although you're probably super tired of hearing this question, but when ballpark might we come back, return to normal in your opinion?
Wow.
And is there going to be such a thing as the old normal?
So, I first want to, I just take a moment to say thank you to Reverend Perry and to Reverend Clayton and to your families for the participation, right, in the clinical trials. This kind of representation in the clinical research is so critical, and it's really important. You started the show, Tom, by asking about vaccine confidence and hesitancy, and one of the most common questions I know I get asked as I speak with people is sort of, who was in the trial? Was I in the trial, basically, right? As somebody who looks like me, who I identify with, my age, was I in the trial? And that is incredibly powerful information to look at people and say, yes, right? Yes, you were in the trial. That Moderna even slowed down the participation, their sort of rate of recruitment so that they could ensure that there was diversity in the participation. I think that's so important for people to know, that was a great value. And even for, as we talk about Tuskegee and these realities, we have to acknowledge them. These are rational concerns. Let's be sort of clear that there is a history of experimentation in our country on Black and brown bodies. People are going to bring that, as well as, the earned mistrust of some of our healthcare institutions. So that's the reality we're starting from. People will have these questions, but to be able to say that not only were the clinical trial participants diverse, but so were the scientists. Right? We have a different degree of representation and leadership now than we have before. And so there are people who look like America as part of the scientific leadership team for these vaccines in their development. And who are, among others, are going to be reminding always about these important questions of equity. So just to say that there is a lot that's different, Reverend Perry's good point that we weren't starting at zero with any of the science and technology, really building on research that's been done for years, particularly when we talk about something like mRNA, right, which is a newer approach, and the safety that's there. And then, the one other point I'd like to make before asking about answering about the normal is, I think we had concerns before about whether there would be political interference in the review process. You know, these scientific agencies at the level of the federal government who review the information provided about vaccines. And I'm very confident that we haven't seen that, right? That the scientists who have come on as advisors and, FDA, CDC, ACIP, I know it's a lot of alphabet soup, but all these different scientific groups have really been allowed to do their work and to lead with science. The group that's working on the prioritization is centering on equity as well. So there's, I think, a lot to lift up in the camp of, to Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton's point, making sure people know this information and can hear it from people that they trust, both in the scientific community and in their families. And I do think we're going to get to a new normal, Tom. I think, but this is also, we have to build back better, right? I think it's very exciting to see a new normal in so many ways. And that's where we're heading. But, the tunnel isn't short, right? We see the light there at the end, but we have to get through these next, many months when we think about vaccination very broadly, which again, is not the full panacea, right? Like we have to keep in mind, we have to keep masking, we have to keep thinking about treatments. But I'm hopeful for a holiday season next year where we're gathering in our household, where the kids will have all their grandparents with them to celebrate. And so that's what I'm thinking of. What does December 2021 look like for us? And can we be a new normal by then?
Excellent. Dr. Dela Cruz, you're a hedge fund artist, or are you gonna
No, I totally agree with what Dr. Nunez-Smith says. I think the next few months, unfortunately, it's going to be a little bit rougher for everybody because of the numbers. It's a winter time, and it's also holiday season where most people feel like, they want to be next to their family members, travel, have a big gatherings. Unfortunately, I think those cannot be done this holiday season at all. You want to not travel if you can, stay within your household. If you can, do the social distancing, wear masks, and not have a large gathering, and do virtual like Zoom meetings. And I think one of the benefit of, unfortunately, or fortunately, with the pandemic, and people from afar are now getting closer through other mediums that they don't see each other from. And I think that may be one of the newer norms. People will see more each other from these Zoom mechanisms. The other new norms is the mask. I think we've learned a lot about infectious disease and spread of infections, not just COVID, but other viruses like influenza and other respiratory viruses. And more people have shown that all the good efforts that people are doing with masks and social distancing have prevented the numbers of influenza and all these other viruses, even now, right? And so I could imagine a year from now, during the winter time and crowded seasons, and that people would be wearing masks for a flu season, right? Because that has been effective. Less people are getting sick from those other viruses. So that's sort of, unfortunately, the other benefit of this pandemic is that we're seeing less of those, which is great, right? And so those are sort of newer norms. And I think as more and more learn about what the vaccines are, and not be afraid of it, and be participating in these trials, and getting the vaccines when they're turned, is that more and more people are immunized, and so we can get back to regular business. And like Dr. Nunez-Smith says, it's probably next year.
Were you disappointed in terms of the number of people that traveled this past Thanksgiving?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, very much. And I also saw in social media that in other parts of the world, London is shutting down tonight or something like that, right? And there's a big rush of the train station and airport. And I feel for them because they want to go and visit their loved ones, and but being in that crowded space and that anxiety, and it's I think it puts everyone at risk, not only yourself, but also when you go visit your family members, you're not sure whether you're going to pick up something on the way there, right? And so I think I think we have to make some sacrifices, unfortunately, and be a little bit creative, at least in the next few months.
Oh,
Yeah. If I might, Tom, because I just agree so much that we have to, I heard someone say, the disappointment, can't kill you, but COVID can. And so we know that it's hard, it's a sacrifice to not gather as we normally do, but it is just so critically important. I mean, I am worried and concerned by the numbers I'm hearing in terms of, the people moving now for the Christmas holiday, and, TSA is screening these high numbers of people at airports, and it's just so important to get out that message that we have to stay with the people who are just part of our household and celebrate in that way. And then to this question about the vaccine, I mean, similar, I think it is so important for us to understand, I think, the choices, like what our choice actually is right now, as people rightly have questions about the vaccine, and hopefully we're answering them in forums like this and others. But with the rate of transmission as we see it now, to Dr. De La Cruz's point, I mean, it is so rampant. There is really almost nowhere in our country, right, that isn't in a surge, that, it's the virus or the vaccine, right? I mean, that is the choice that we will face for ourselves. And so we are very grateful that there are 2 vaccine candidates, potentially others in the pipeline, that have gotten this emergency use authorization statute. Our hospitals, our healthcare systems, the best are really facing crisis. The best way we can show honor and respect to the healthcare workers, is by doing these things that we're talking about, right? We all say thank you and put up the signs, and that's great. But if we wear our mask, if we stay socially distant, celebrate in small groups, that is the best way to show tribute to all of the people who are, putting their own lives on the line every day, the physicians and nurses, the respiratory therapists, the people who are cleaning and feeding us in the hospitals, right? Everyone who works there, let's honor them this holiday season and make these safe public health choices.
Excellent. Dr. De La Cruz, you've seen in the news, of course, about this word mutation, and I would say, only in the last year did most of the population even pay attention to health matters. I mean, no offense to your industry, but you go to the doctors, you go to the dentist, and you forget about how important that is. But we've seen in the news about the mutations. Any response to how do the current vaccines negate these mutations? I mean, there's terms of misinformation and confusion that the media will put out.
Yeah, so some of these viruses can mutate fast. Like, for example, the influenza, it's notorious for mutating, and that's why every year we have a new vaccine, right? And that's why it's important every year you get your flu shot, because that's specific for certain strains. For the virus that causes COVID-19, it does mutate, but not at the same rate. It does it very slow way, and from the studies that have shown, it hasn't impacted the kind of vaccine efficacy in terms of the what you're going to get out of the vaccines with these mutations. There are some reports that probably people are hearing in some parts of London, for example, that there might be some new mutations, but it's really early days that we don't know what it means. I know there are some restrictions in other European countries from preventing movement from the UK to those countries. I think it's one of those things that we need to study as we go, and it's still a pandemic that we need to understand. And from at best as we all understand, this virus doesn't mutate that fast at all. And so I think the vaccines that are being implemented now, the 2 that you've heard of, and usually they find an area of the virus that is fairly well conserved. That means that they're targeting an area where it's less likely to be mutated, for example, and hopefully it would, that will work over time. And so, and I think currently we don't have any concerns.
Thanks. We have about 12 more minutes, so I want to kind of just see if people have any kind of, not necessarily closing remarks, but just thoughts. So, Reverend Perry, was that your?
Yeah. I wanted to thank Marcella again for what she said, because there are a number of people who even I had talked with about being involved in the Pfizer study. When they heard that the president was going to fast track the vaccine she was saying, oh, see, I told you, the political people are determining whether or not this vaccine it should be taken or should be safe or can be safe. And I'm so glad to hear Marcella say that basically the scientists remain strong with regards to, you know, following all the precautions and procedures that were necessary, particularly in these studies, and that politics did not play a part in the fact that that it's available now. The second thing I like to mention is that Build Back Better is an interesting way of looking at what we're looking for in the future. I would just add Build Back Better Black. I can say that. Build Back Better Black and Brown communities so that we won't be in the position where we find ourselves today with regards to this particular pandemic. And I do have one question for our physicians here, and that is, we talk about COVID, and we talk about people dying, we talk about people being on respirators, but are there adverse effects? Like, can you get brain damage and other things from COVID that is not necessarily put out in the press? Or are those rare, are they just rarities, or they may have nothing to do with the COVID?
Yeah, Reverend Perry, that's a great question. I think if you're infected with COVID and have some of these effects, I think it's very likely it's related to that infection, which is why it's important to stay away, stay safe, get vaccinated. And I think the more we learn about this virus, I'm a pulmonologist, and so a lot of people think that it causes problems breathing, and that's the only thing, right? But the more we learn about it in this past year is that this virus has a lot of multiple effects. You know, it causes some people to not be able to smell or taste good, right? That's that's some of the symptoms. Some people have headaches, and people develop strokes from it, for example. And some people have heart problems, right? Cardiac problems. Some people have skin changes, for example, right? And people who have recovered over time, and Yale has a post-COVID clinic for people who have had COVID, and they're seeing these patients with residual problems. And so some of these problems include fatigue, headaches, they can't think right, they have this foggy mind, they call it. So they're working really hard with our neurologists and with our psychiatry and cardiologists. So this is not just the lung. Unfortunately, it can cause multiple different organs. And so for people who've had it and have some residual problems, there are help at Yale if you need them, the post-COVID clinic, for example. And so people have done some work with imaging the brain to see if you have any changes. And they find some changes. And so, personality changes, people have reported, hard to concentrate, memory problems. The virus is very sneaky, right? And so some causes more types of symptoms than other types of symptoms. And so I think it's not just the pulmonologists or infectious disease doctor that are busy. All these colleagues of ours from other specialties are as busy trying to deal with this.
Dr. Perry, I'm glad you asked that question very much. So I'm going to show in a few weeks of 4 guys that have somewhat recovered from COVID, just to kind of get a feel for their health, how they're seeing their health status at the moment. But I wanted to ask, as we kind of conclude, we have another 10 minutes or so. Dr. Nunez and Dr. Dela Cruz, how can I put this? What percentage of people have to get the vaccines before we kind of can see the light at the end of the tunnel? And that time frame, I mean, you mentioned next Christmas. I think folks need to really just understand this is World War IV in a way, or World War V on us, not to mention people in other countries that might have difficulties getting the vaccine. But in terms of the percentage of folks that must get vaccinated for us to kind of feel that we're saving one another.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I want to lift up that last point that you made, Tom, first, which is we have to think about this in a global way. Uh, there is no question we see. I mean, this is a great benefit we have in our globe being so tiny, and, planes kind of coming all, can take you across the ocean in hours, right? But that's also, of course, how viruses can travel as well. And so we shouldn't think only about the United States, right? We have to keep in mind that we have, it's the global vaccination campaign that we have to wage. So the numbers, I will let Dr. De La Cruz give you kind of more specific numbers. The numbers that I'm privy to are, around sort of 70 to 90% of people needing to be vaccinated. And just to keep in mind for everyone listening that for the two authorized candidates right now, the Pfizer and Moderna products, those are there are two vaccines in this series, right? So you take the first shot, and then somewhere around 3 to 4 weeks later, you take a second. So it's a real lift to think about getting people, their completed vaccination series, and getting to those kind of numbers in the United States and across the globe. And certainly we still know that the research is ongoing. We have questions around, children. As we know, the president-elect is very committed and determined for us to reopen schools, but to do so safely in a well-resourced way. And so I think we have other questions too about specific populations and groups, like our youngest among us. But yes, Dr. De La Cruz, please.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Nunez-Smith. I think the numbers that I've heard are in the sort of 70, 80% range of everybody, getting vaccination, right? And that's a large number, right? 70, 80% to get everyone, not only to be available to them, but also delivered in the 2 doses. And I know, there are vaccine hesitancy about using the vaccines, and so it's a big task, and I think that's why I think these messaging and shows like this and other efforts are important to actually curb this and provide this herd immunity, meaning that most of the population have immunity so that we're safe around. So this also highlights that that this needs to be done in conjunction with continuing some of the social distancing and mask wearing efforts, right? Because until we get there, I think we're not out of the woods. And I think we have to think harder about our neighbors who may not have, access to this. And I think the richer countries get to have the vaccines, but there are places around the world that they don't even have access to, measuring their oxygen, for example. So I think these different perspectives are important. And, not to be doom and gloom, but I think we can get there. I think with efforts like this, with more treatments, with vaccination, with social distancing, I think we'll plow it together and plow through this.
I agree. May I make 2 quick comments?
We can take a vote, or we could have a parliamentary procedure, or we could have a retreat, or we could call Congress back, or we could pass a bill. I mean, what you tell us, Dr. Nunez-Smith, you have the floor. I will yield my time to you.
So I wanted to lift up just a couple of things too, and agree 100%. I mean, so one of these questions, even as we know, what we study in the vaccine and what we have seen is that it helps prevent really severe consequence and complication from infection. This is really important. This is critical. It helps save hospital beds and other things. And we're going to keep that destination in mind to get to over 70% of the population in the world. What we are still kind of waiting for more data on is whether the vaccine really keeps you from being able to spread it to other people, right? So that is this idea of sterilization immunity. And so we don't really know. So it makes even more important that, even if you've been vaccinated, right, that you continue to observe these still behaviors, right, of wearing the mask. and other things. So I just wanted to say that. And also, let's not forget kind of the other important things in the cascade. We've talked about treatment a little bit, and there are new treatment options and new ones on the horizon, hopefully. But testing, we need more testing. We're not doing we're not doing sufficient testing. And that is really important and a high priority too, to make sure kind of along the way that everybody who, needs to be tested can get a test, which is very important.
Harry's going to play the music shortly, so let's just continue to talk until he slams the hammer on us.
And we need to also, I think for the United States, important for our role in the global community. And this, I think, is an important moment. We've unfortunately stepped away from that role in this current administration. And if ever there's evidence that, we have to reinvest or recommit to that, it's now.
Excellent. Questions, comments, thoughts as we kind of conclude, everyone? I know, Tisha, I can't call on you, so I'm not going to do that.
I was actually going to say one of the most important things. So I would just want to thank Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton for everything that they've been doing as the cultural ambassadors. They're, as you said, Tom, not new to this fight. They've been at it for 10 years, but really important for the listening audience. We've talked about the importance of people like us participating in clinical trials, but it's not about, as Marcella said, it's about acknowledging the past, but it's about getting the information out, understanding really what are the regulatory frameworks that are in place today that make this safe, getting the information so you can, as Mrs. Clayton did, understand the risk and the benefits of participation, even if you don't trust your husband to give it to you. And for the IRB that might have been listening, Reverend Clayton did not threaten his divorce. That was not a coercive thing to get her to sign the consent, but to get more information about clinical research or to understand what's out there or to ask any of the questions that people might have, they can visit the website, they can speak to a cultural ambassador, but it's really important to just get accurate information so that you can make an informed decision. That's the important piece of considering research. And doing all of the things that Dr. Nunez-Smith and Dr. Dela Cruz and Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton have uplifted in the show. That's how we're going to get back to normal. We need to get these answers, but we also need to follow the advice of the leaders in this space and understand that they really do have our best interests at heart and are working hard on our behalf every day, and we thank them.
Definitely. Dr. Dela Cruz, just before you sign off, is there a possibility that additional vaccines might be on the market? Or will that confuse people?
I think there will be. I think there are several being studied right now. I think the idea of more possibilities for vaccines is a good thing, both for availability, but also options. The two current ones are actually as good as they get, to be honest. I think scientists and doctors, I think, in the COVID times, have been sort of perusing and looking at the results and critiquing on their own or in groups or in societies, and really found pretty promising with the two vaccines that are already approved. I think we talked about the global, view. I think the more options, the better. I think for the future. I think for everybody.
Again, happy holidays, everybody. Hope to speak to you in 2021. Let's stay safe. Let's stay healthy. Let's take charge of our health. And to everyone on the panel, whether you're a political appointee or just a little reverend in a small church in Brantford, we're all kind of equal in the Lord's eyes. So let's do our part to be historical change agents. Thank you, everybody. Talk to you soon.
Happy holidays.
This is Harry Grove, and you're listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM New Haven.
Now you gon' face the dawn you waited for. I said from night to dawn, I right my wrongs, alarm in competition with warnings. I